City. This is Charlie Rose.
The modern book arrived via the Gutenberg press in the 1430s. It has remained relatively unaltered for more than 5 centuries. Now Jeff Bezos aims to change this with the help of the company he founded and remains CEO of, Amazon.com. This morning, his company launched the Kindle, a new device for reading digital books that Newsweek calls the iPod of reading. Amazon.com started selling books online in 1995. Today, it is the world's largest internet retailer, selling a range of products from electronics to groceries. Despite claims that it was expanding too fast, Amazon has soared and the stock price has doubled over the last year. I am pleased to have Jeff Bezos here to talk about what might be a replacement for the book. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
Great to see you.
It's nice to be here.
Tell me when you first had the idea for what led to this. And I just want to do 2 things. This is Newsweek.
Yep.
Newsweek cover story says, this morning's Newsweek, books aren't dead, they're just going digital. 5 centuries after Gutenberg, Amazon's Jeff Bezos is betting that the future of reading is just a click away. May I hold this?
Of course. Here, let me put it on for you.
Here in my hands is what we're talking about. It is called the Kindle. More about that later. Tell me when you first had the idea that this might be possible.
Well, I've been selling ebooks for a long time.
Right.
Nobody's been buying ebooks.
Right.
So very,
right,
very small.
It's an idea that's been out there for a long time.
For a long time,
Right.
And
in technology terms.
yes, and so about 3 years ago, we started working on Kindle, and what we realized at the time was that there were a few technologies that were sort of converging that we could combine together with the right recipe and make something that would be what we hoped would be transformative in the world of electronic reading. And I think the thing that you have, for me, one of the most interesting questions is, why haven't books been digitized already? You know, books are the last bastion of analog.
Right.
And so why is that? And I think the answer is that it's because books are so good. You know, the physical book is so highly evolved and so elegantly suited to its purpose that it's hard to improve on. It isn't like some other artifacts, some other objects. It's something very, very emotional and personal for people. Now, but the book has a feature which I think is hard to notice, but it's the book's most important feature, and that is that it disappears.
What does that mean?
So when you're reading, you don't notice the paper and the ink and the glue and the stitching.
You just feel the story.
All of that dissolves, and what remains is the author's world. And you go into this flow state. And that ability for a book to disappear is something that it became our top design objective for Kindle. Because we knew if we couldn't replicate that aspect of a book, that nobody would use this device. And if you think about it, there's a lot of things that have to go into that to get something to disappear like that and to vanish, so that you can get in that very pleasurable mental flow state that readers know and love.
I should say one thing to interrupt you, is that this is a self-contained unit.
That's right.
This is not a case with most other electronic books where you put it on, you download it onto a computer and then onto another device.
This device doesn't interact with a computer, doesn't require a PC at all.
It's more like a cell phone?
Yes, it's a standalone device, and it has an EVDO radio. EVDO is the most advanced cell phone radio on the market. It's a 3G, these new 3G smartphones. It's very fast, and that's what makes the wirelessness of this work.
Now,
so you shop right from the device.
Okay. And how many books are available as we speak?
90,000 as we speak, which is about the size of a big book superstore. And what's important is these are the books that people really want to read.
These are bestsellers, these are classics.
That's right. This includes, if you look at the current New York Times bestseller list, there are 112 books on the current New York Times list. And this device right now, as we speak, has 101 of those 112. So you've got
So what's wrong with the other 11?
Well, there are rights issues.
Okay.
There are also, but 101 of 112 New York Times bestsellers is really, it shows that we're really getting the books that people want to read.
So you go to the publisher.
we go to the publisher. And the publishers have worked as hard on this as we have. We've been working, this represents all major publishers are participating in this device. And we've been working with them for 3 years on this.
Now, let me get this scene straight. So here you show up. You say, "Hi, I'm Jeff Bezos. I'm here. I'm here to make a deal with you. And by the way, what I want to do will do away with books as we know them."
Well,
that's essentially the conversation.
Well, I think when publishers started to see this device, because publishers, of course, have seen every e-book scheme in the history of the universe.
And they're fearful of digitization, whatever it might mean, or they're hopeful about it.
But they also want to be on board with it, you know, which I think is the right approach.
Unlike the music business at the beginning.
Well, and maybe that's a parable that people are paying attention to as well. But one of the things that it's important to embrace new technologies instead of to fight them. You know, people forget the book itself is a technology and a very sophisticated one, and it's evolved from clay tablets to, you know, to parchment and all kinds of things that are. You forget because you're so accustomed to it that you forget that it's a technology.
And one of the interesting questions, books.
And everything evolves.
Yes. So books should as well.
Books are not frozen in time.
In order to have this conversation, I want to know more about this. So you already sold a whole bunch of these already. You announced it this morning here in New York.
That's right.
It's the cover of Newsweek. And it's selling like crazy. It sells for $399.
That's right.
You go buy a book. Use the machine to buy a book.
You go to the store right on the device. You wirelessly buy a book.
It costs $9.99 for most of them?
That's right. All New York Times bestsellers, all new releases are $9.99. Even if in paper they're $25 or $30 books.
All right. What else can you do with this device in terms of reading a book?
Well, you can look up definitions in context. In fact, one of the things I've discovered, and I've been reading on this device for some time now, is that my vocabulary is not as good as I thought it was. There's a 250,000 word dictionary resident on this device, which in the paper version of this dictionary weighs 8.1 pounds. This device weighs 10 ounces, and by the way, will hold 200 books. So this dictionary, when you're reading, if you find a word that you're not sure of the definition, you can just select that line of text, click on this select wheel here, and it'll pull up the definition of that word. And because it's so easy to do, I look up more words than I used to do. You can change the font size on this device. So if you're reading on the treadmill
or you're a little older,
then you can increase the font size. Absolutely. Yeah. But the coolest feature as regards books is that you can think of a book and have it a minute later. So this is because without futzing with a PC or doing anything, wherever you happen to be, you can be lying in bed or you can be on a train. And in either case, you can go to the store, you can browse, you can search, so you can type in the name of a favorite author, or you can browse. Both things.
And if you want to do a reference while you're reading it to a character or to something else the author may have written in another chapter in another book?
Yeah, you can search the interior text of books as well. Plus, you have wireless access to Wikipedia on this device. The Wikipedia, of course, has 44 million pages, and if you were to put it on a bookshelf, it would be 2 miles long. So the fact that you can, you know, as you're reading, that you can do these things. You can also highlight text. You can underline text.
You can access newspapers.
You can access newspapers. We have the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Local newspapers become national newspapers when they're on Kindle.
This is amazing. I mean, it says previous page. Previous pages here. You want to go back to the previous page.
That's right.
Go forward to the next page. You buy Kindle. You get a chance to read the first chapter of any book that's digitized.
As a sample. So you can read, which is great for discovery. So when you have a Kindle, you can go to the store, you can browse around, you can find something you think you might be interested in, a new author that you've never tried, and you can download the first chapter for free.
This book you have here, I'm looking at now, The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett.
That's the recent Oprah pick. It's 992 pages long. And I downloaded it in less than a minute onto my Kindle. This is not a book I would normally travel with. 992 pages. I'm not that strong.
I have friends that take 3 or 4 books with them whenever they travel.
Of course.
So this is at least an idea they'll be interested in.
By the way, most readers, Charlie, as I'm sure you know, maybe even you're one of these types of readers. don't just read books serially. They have many books going at the same time.
Oh, suppose I read Follett today, and I'm getting to chapter 3, and I'm on page 49. Mm-hmm. Yeah, suppose I turn it down. I turn it off.
Right.
Does it immediately come back to that book?
Yes, it auto bookmarks your last page read on everything that you read. So that's one of the reasons you're keeping 3 or 4 books going. It's also very convenient because it's remembering where you left off. You could come back to it a month later. Same thing with when you make margin notes or highlight text. That also is stored and saved, and it's saved on the server side too. It's saved in the internet cloud at Amazon, so you can never lose those notes marks. If you delete a book off of this device, we save an archival copy for you at Amazon so that for free you can always re-download it later.
You can always go back to books you've already read.
And that's right.
Okay. What does this mean for publishing companies? They are still they're charging you more than you're charging me. Because it is a what?
Well, if you think about this from a publishing company's point of view, there are a lot of advantages to this. They have books never go out of print,
right?
Which publishers love. Yeah. They never go out of stock. So, when Jessica Seinfeld's book, Deceptively Delicious, was mentioned as a surprise on Oprah Winfrey, right, it immediately was sold out everywhere, but not on Kindle. We were, all of us who had Kindles at that point, which was just internal Amazonians at that point, we were able to order Deceptively Delicious, even though it was sold out everywhere. So books never going out of stock. Another point if you think about it from a publisher's point of view, is they no longer have to guess what an initial print run should be. So, they have a hard time, should we print 15,000 copies of this book or 5,000 copies of this book?
Are there publishers who are resistant to this?
We've gotten great cooperation from publishers. They've embraced this. I think
all of them?
When they see, all the major publishers are in here, and actually I think most of the small publishers as well, but all the major publishers are in here without exception. And I think that what they see, part of it is when they saw this device, because they've seen the landscape of previous devices and that they haven't worked very well, but I think when they saw this device, they got excited about it.
Libraries. What does this mean for libraries?
I don't know. There are people who have worked out methods. So if you think about a library, one of the ways that works for publishers is that there's limited access to the book. So if you go to they may have a library, they may have one copy of a particular book, and if you go wanting that book and it's already checked out, you have to wait until the person who has it returns it to the library. So it provides some kind of check mechanisms. And so there are people who have worked out ways to do similar kinds of mechanisms with electronic books.
So there's an experimentation taking place.
There are people who have worked out things that want to experiment. It's not on our roadmap, but if it's something that customers want, we may figure out how to do it.
What's on your roadmap?
Well, if you look at this device, we just launched this literally this morning, so this was on our roadmap until about 6 hours ago.
Well, you got Newsweek. You got Newsweek, you're here, and you've sold out. That's not a bad start.
We sold out of our initial inventory in the first 5.5 hours, which is very encouraging, and the manufacturing facilities are running full tilt. We'll have more in 2 days.
And so where do you go buy this thing?
You go
online to Amazon.
You go to Amazon.com, and when you buy it, we associate it with your Amazon account. Yeah. And when you get it, and you take it out of the box, and you turn the power switch on, it's already, it recognizes you by name. It already knows who you are. So it's the easiest setup in the world. You literally turn the power switch on, and you can start buying and downloading books.
Amazon is famous for recommending other things, magazines,
newspapers.
Okay. Blogs? You get blogs here?
You get blogs on this, too. You subscribe to blogs, and they're continuously updated throughout the day. Newspapers are updated overnight while you sleep. You wake up in the morning, and the newspaper has been pushed to your device. So it's very, very convenient, the newspapers that you subscribe to.
And Monday morning, like Newsweek, you could have gotten Newsweek?
Absolutely.
Now, what's the subscription price, say, for the New York Times every day?
The New York Times, I think, is about $13 a month.
Right.
For a
and Newsweek would be about?
I don't remember what weekly magazines
But you get most magazines.
Time,
Vogue,
Fortune,
Vanity Fair.
We're increasing that list of magazines every week that goes by.
Now, who's resistant to this? Who says, Jeff, good for you, it's a very interesting product, but somehow, it's taking me where I don't want to go.
Our toughest customers are the folks, and they're definitely the customer set that we most want to love this device, but they are the heavy readers. These are the people who have a lifelong love affair with books. And I'll tell you what happens, and you have a lifelong love affair with books, Charlie. I'm a big reader, too. My parents couldn't punish me as a child. I was happy to sit in my room and read.
Oh, yeah. I know.
And so it is
the most delightful thing of growing up for me was when the bookmobile arrived every Monday morning.
Right. Yeah, in the little town where I spent my summers with my grandfather on his ranch, they had one of these little town libraries.
Yeah.
And it probably had some guy in town who was a big science fiction reader had donated his whole science fiction collection to the library at one point. And I think over the course of several summers,
you read all of it.
I read all through the whole, that whole section.
There's a connection to that to what was saying at the end of the conversation about space travel.
Okay.
But go ahead. So you can download blogs, you can download newspapers and magazines. It has no audio component.
No, you can listen to audiobooks, but it really is not. It's really a purpose-built reading device. That's what all of our engineering and design and everything we've tried to simplify and make work is all about reading. And and we really wanted it to be perfect for long reading sessions. If you want to read tiny snippets of text, you can do that on your cell phone or your BlackBerry. But if you're really going to sit back in a comfortable chair and relax into a book,
is the size and feel of it.
It's
just
10
sit
ounces.
here, wherever you are.
Yeah.
And you can almost put it in your pocket, but not quite.
Not quite.
But put it in and just here. I'm looking at Pillars of the
It's
Earth.
actually lighter than a physical book.
The Wall Street Journal, The Onion, the Black Swan, the Washington Post, New York Times, Seattle Times. All these are here. The biggest thing you say was creating a device in which the book itself would disappear.
Exactly, so that you could enter that author's world. But then we also knew that we needed to go beyond one thing you can't do is you can't outbook the book. You have to accept its key feature and embrace that, which is that it disappears and gets out of the way.
What does outbook the book mean?
Outbook the book. By that I mean we have to look for things that we can do with this technology that you could never do with a paper book, instead of trying to duplicate every last feature. I'll give you an analog from the early days of Amazon.com. We would always get asked, and going back 10, 11, 12 years now, we would always get asked, how are you going to do virtual book signings? Well, we never did figure out how to do virtual book signings. We can't duplicate every single thing that physical bookstores do really well. But we've been able, instead, we've done things that physical bookstores could never do, like customer reviews. It's a much-loved feature on Amazon that people can go in and read customer reviews and write customer reviews, and that's something you can't do in a physical. So you have to play to the strengths of the new medium. Customers who bought this also bought that. That's another much-loved feature on Amazon. It's something that doesn't make any sense in a physical bookstore. So we have looked for things that we could put on Kindle that play to the strengths of this wireless technology, of this amazing display device, that are different from what you could do with a physical book.
When I first heard about this, my first instinct was that the beginning of this for you was always being interested in books and certainly understanding the digital world and electronic books, that you had looked at the success of the iPod and said to yourself, why can't we do something like this for books? Something to be self-contained, something that would give me a better reproduction of anything that I've seen. But I read where you'd say that was not exactly like that, although before launch, you looked carefully at the iPod launch.
The music and video have been digital for a long time. This is one of the interesting thing about books, and it's because of the display device, is they're harder to digitize. They're harder to get people to accept a digital version because you needed this amazing paper-like display to get that to happen. Music has been digital since CDs. It was analog when it was on vinyl, but CDs are digital. And then
that's right. Exactly.
See what I'm saying? And the same thing, video was analog when it was on VHS tape, but it became digital when it went on to Laserdisc for a nanosecond, however long Laserdisc were around.
That's why you can play your CD on your DVD player.
Yes, exactly. And so those media are already digital. This was a very different set of problems that we had to solve to make this work, because it really relied essentially on bringing several different elements together.
You could not have done this 5 years ago?
No way. No way. Impossible. In fact, when we started, we've been working on this for 3 years.
Yeah.
And when we started, we were basically taking a bet that the technology that we needed to be able to get this to work would be commercially available in the next 2 to 3 years. You know, we were looking ahead a couple of years into the future. And
you started knowing where the technology was going.
This electronic ink, paper-like display, that has been in the lab for more than 10 years.
Wow. How fragile is it? What if I dropped it on the floor?
You should go to the detail page on, if you go to Amazon.com/Kindle, one of the cool things that the team did was they put a drop test, a video of a Kindle drop test.
Yes.
So you can actually watch in slow motion as Kindle hits the surface. It's the kind of an industry standard surface. It's a metal surface with a certain thickness of rubber on top of it, dropped from, 30 inches or whatever it is. There's some kind, and you can watch the whole thing kind of flex and so on. But it's designed, these days you can design these devices with.
What is it? This is what?
This is plastic.
Just plastic, okay.
And but it's a plastic that's designed to absorb energy. So when it drops and hits on a corner, it absorbs that energy. You can treat this, I would treat it like I would treat a BlackBerry or something like that. Sure. So you can treat it pretty roughly. I wouldn't throw it on the ground on purpose. I'd take it to the beach just like I'd take my BlackBerry to the beach, but I wouldn't bury it in sand.
But just tell me one more time, because I went by it too fast. Did the iPod inform you at all? And you explained the differences in video and words, but did it inform you at all, that experience?
Well, I think one of the things that is analogous is that people like carrying their library around. So people like carrying their music library around. Instant access. And here, you can keep 200 books with you on this 10-ounce device.
And 5 years from now, I'll be able to read what on Kindle?
Our vision, and whether we can get there in 5 years, I don't know for sure. But our vision is that you should be able to read any book in any language that's ever been printed, whether it's in print or out of print, and you should be able to buy and get that book downloaded to your Kindle in less than 60 seconds.
Any book?
Ever in print.
How goes this world of digitization of all the information available to humankind?
Well,
this is a Google sort of...
personally, I think it's a very exciting concept. I mean, I think this idea of making information more readily available to, us mere humans, it's pretty exciting.
But where is it? Where are we in that? In terms of the digitization of...
Hour zero of day one.
Is that right?
Absolutely. I think we're at the very beginning.
And the biggest impediment is what?
Well, there are all kinds of impediments. There are IP issues, intellectual property, licensing issues. There are issues.
Are they the biggest issue, though?
No, it's a combination. There are economic issues. There are technology issues. Scanning and digitizing works in a cost-effective way, especially if if you really want to get to that, what I'm talking about here, this full vision of every book that's ever been in print. A lot of those books, you have to figure out how to solve certain economic problems, because a lot of those books nobody wants to look at. Or let's say, that may be quite right, but maybe one person wants to look at them once a year, right? So when you get out into that very deep zone, you're not talking about Oprah Winfrey's latest pick. It's a very easy decision to figure out how to digitize Oprah Winfrey's latest pick. The economics make a lot of sense there. As you get further out into the tail, you have to do that. Then there are issues, legal and contractual issues with things like orphaned works, where the book is still in copyright, but it's not worth the legal fees that would be required to track down the estate of the now dead author.
And find all the heirs.
And find all the heirs and get their permission. And, the heirs aren't expecting to make any money off of this book, probably, and they would love to see their grandfather's book back in circulation, but it's just not worth the legal fees that would be required to track that down. And then if you get into the world of photography, it gets even more complicated.
Stephen Levy talks about lots of things here, and I want to expand this conversation before we start talking about Amazon and the internet and everything else. He talks about what this means for writers and writing, that somehow writers may begin to approach the idea of writing a novel in a different way. If, in fact, people can connect with what they're writing all along,
he talks about the return to the serialization.
Exactly, the Dickens
Charles
serialization.
Dickens, right.
You know, tell me how that might work out.
Why wouldn't that happen? I mean, I think, you know, we've always seen that when you have a new technology or new medium, it can create a new art form, or sometimes re-enliven old ones, as in the case of the Charles Dickens serialization. But when you have a wireless device like this, and we're not doing this today, but why couldn't an author decide, look, I'll sell a subscription to my book instead of selling the book, and
you can download it
as I write it, it'll automatically be delivered
and
to
I
your
may
Kindle.
take into account of what you say in terms of character development.
Why not? I mean, these are the kinds of things that are possible, and I personally believe that there will be many, many experiments done over time. I think most of those experiments will fail. You know, they won't be that interesting. You know, but the great thing is a high rate of experimentation will lead to a few winners, and we may get, you know, a return to the Dickens serialization or something else that's not even been thought of yet.
Why the name Kindle?
Kindle, because
Kindle.
Right, to start a fire.
In your mind, in your imagination, in everything. A book
Absolutely.
starts a fire.
Absolutely.
It starts a fire of a revolution that's going to change the world of books.
Absolutely.
Whatever,
all those
whatever
meanings.
you want to choose.
All of those meanings.
So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, in the year 20, we're in 2007, in 2020, 13 years from now, people will not be buying books?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they will be buying books.
But not with the same volume.
I believe...
They won't be building libraries.
I believe that they may be building cabinets of curiosities, and there may be, you know, there will always be books that are, you know, collector's items, rare books, and so on. But I think if you look sufficiently far in the future, whether it's 13 years or 23 years or 35 years, I don't know how many years you have to look in the future, but it doesn't make any sense to me that you know, printing our books on dead trees is the final step in the evolution of books.
Trees all over the world are clapping, saying, "Oh my God! Guess what? They're not going to be making books anymore."
I'm sure people thought, you know, papyrus was the end all and be all too.
Yeah. What do you think the societal implications of all this are?
Well, when experiments get done, society benefits. I mean, because the customers get to choose. They get to choose. You know, we're not going to stop selling physical books. We're going to keep doing that. A lot of people are going to...
Well, you may not sell as many 10 years from now.
Well, maybe not.
But may sell more of these. I mean, it's clearly going to be that kind of thing if it catches on.
No, that's right. There would be one thing. You may all in sell more books, though.
Yeah.
Because
ease of access.
Ease of access. Anything you do that reduces friction, that makes something easier to do, you always get more of that.
And the winners in technology and everything else have seemed to me to be, if you talk about the personal computer and everything else, its ease of access has been a critical component that separated winners from losers.
I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons.
Don't you agree?
I think people are so. I do agree, and I think that one of the reasons people are so excited about this device is because it doesn't involve a PC.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have that dread of how am I going to get this to interoperate with my PC. It just works as a standalone device.
I have known you for a long time.
Yes.
Before your kids were born, by the way, Mackenzie. Where do you put this in terms of all you have done with your life? Starting Amazon, clearly, you know, was in driving out to Seattle and doing all of that. And then building Amazon. And then when the dot-com implosion came, worrying about making sure that you survived and prospered. Then expanding Amazon into all kinds of products. You can buy anything now, almost, on Amazon. Televisions, everything else, appliances, all kinds of things. Where do you put this? Does this have more emotional meaning for you than anything you have done since the start of Amazon?
Yes, and I'll tell you, and the way I think about it is, I just ask myself, what could be more meaningful than trying to improve the book?
Nothing.
I am hard pressed.
Because books are at the core of
they're
your
at the core
success.
Of they're also at the core of civilization. I mean, history is really recorded history, and it's been written. And there are things that you can only teach in long-form narrative. We all have this experience of being given advice by somebody, and you don't listen to the advice, and then later you regret it, and you're like, gosh, I should have listened to that advice. Yeah. But when you read a whole book that's well written, a novel, which can teach a lot, or a nonfiction book, sometimes it's so delicately crafted that you can actually learn. It's almost like you've lived an alternate life, so you can really learn from that experience. And that recording of history, that recording of emotion, that is really a big part of what we're talking about when we talk about civilization. And you don't get that in short form.
Exactly. Media.
Media.
Right.
This is a unique thing to, books of, a couple hundred pages or more.
So people will have one of these, or what? I mean,
this is a personal device, so it would be, one per person.
Right. But then you can modernize it. I'll bet you'll have color in 3 years.
The color is in the lab right now. It's years away.
So
I don't know if it's.
I'm going to have to buy another one in 3 years because you'll have color.
I don't know if it's 3 years or 4 years or
right.
5 years, but yes, color is in the laboratory of this display device.
Tell me where Amazon is today. I mean, we've now put this in the context of what you expect from this and a successful launch. Where is Amazon product mix? How you see the world of Amazon?
Well, we have really 3 businesses today. We have our consumer business, which is this is part of that business. Right. We have a seller-facing business. This is where we invite third-party sellers to sell on Amazon. And then we have our newest business, which is a software engineer. Developer is the customer. The software developer is the customer. It's a developer-facing business called Amazon Web Services.
Right.
And all 3 of those businesses are growing very rapidly and doing very well. The seller business has every year become a bigger and bigger part of what we do. It's now, 30%, a little over 30% of the units that we sell are actually sold by third parties.
This is an eBay-like function.
That's right. Think of it as a marketplace, and we invite third-party sellers to sell on our detail pages and to compete directly against us. Sometimes it's a used book. Sometimes it's a new electronics and a new digital camera or what have you, sold right there. And our point of view on this is if a third-party seller can offer a better deal, we should let them do it. We charge them a commission, so that's how we make money off of that transaction. The developer-facing business also came about as something that we were building these web services for our own internal use, because we build this big application called Amazon.com. It's a web-scale application, right. And it relies on certain core fundamental things like storage and compute. And so we built the Elastic Compute Cloud, EC2, which basically allows developers to run their applications on Amazon servers and to grow and shrink the number of servers that they're running their applications on, all done with web services interfaces. It's really a very cool and new kind of technology. The simple storage service is the same thing, but with raw data storage.
Most of the story that I've followed over the last year or so has been about the growth of video. Where are we at this moment, not in terms of video, but just generally in terms of the digital revolution and the growth of the Internet? What moment are we in now? Is it the beginning of something big or at the tail end of something before we start another cycle?
Well, I think it'll be an evolution. I don't think there'll be any big step function changes, but I believe that it's still pretty close to the beginning of video, and I think you'll see a lot of changes happen in that industry over time, because it makes sense to me that that the content is going to become even a little more important than the distribution channels, because the internet becomes a distribution channel that lets if you have a good piece of content, it can find a bigger audience in the modern world, and that's pretty cool, because to me it's much more likely to be a meritocracy where the best content will really find an audience. So it's very encouraging. For me, the big point about the internet, actually I think this is beyond the internet, I think it's a societal trend, is that consumers are becoming ever more empowered every year that goes by.
Clearly.
So they have more transparency, They have better information about what's going on.
They're more participants.
Yes, and in the old days, businesses might have relied on customers being unknowledgeable for part of their profit stream. Maybe they charged a price that was a little higher than their competitors, and they knew that, but they also knew that it was difficult for their customers to do price checks. Well, guess what? That isn't going to work anymore. So as the balance of power shifts from companies and toward consumers because of this perfect information flow that you have on the internet, that's great for society. And in fact, in my view, and I've been saying this for 10 years, I think it's even great for companies that recognize it and embrace it. But if you fight that trend...
You recognize and embrace it by listening to it, or what?
Figuring out what your customers want. Let's say in the old world, you might have put 30% of your energy, dollars, and time into building a great product or service. And then you would put 70% of your energy, dollars, and time into shouting about that service. In the new world, I think that inverts. You better put the bulk of your energy and dollars and time into building a great service, because I think in the new world with information transparency, great services shine through. I got asked today, when I was doing some interviews about Kindle, they said your product launch is very unusual because you're on the cover of Newsweek, that's great. You're doing a lot of media interviews, that's great, but you have no TV advertising. It's unheard of.
Yeah. But more and more product launches, even automobile companies are into that idea.
And I think it's a reflection of this trend. And I believe that, if you build a great product or service, the internet is a word-of-mouth accelerator.
Right.
And if you build a great product or service, people will talk about it. And they will tell their friends. You will get more word of mouth. And we've been doing that for many years at Amazon, and it's been a successful strategy for us.
Yeah, the smartest marketeers are onto that idea. They really do understand that.
Yeah, and it starts with having something that's worthy of being talked about.
But you do much television advertising at all?
No, we don't
Amazon,
do any.
You never have.
We actually, from time to time, we test, because we're very quantitative on things like that. We want to know, would it move the needle? Does it work? Or are we better off putting the money into things like free Super Saver shipping and Amazon Prime and those kinds of things? And every time we've done the test, we'll keep testing. We want to be rational business people, but our starting point is that it makes sense, first and foremost, to just build a great product. That's why we worked on this for 3 years.
Okay, when you were working on this, I want to get to other things, but when you were working on this, were you worried to death somebody was ahead of you and somebody was
we weren't.
onto it?
We weren't.
You thought you had it locked in?
No, it's just that when you put all of these pieces together is so challenging, including the publisher relationships and so on, to get all of that content, the newspaper content, the magazine, the books. We knew that nobody else was working on this or thinking about it the same way that we were.
Used to be. I'll give you 3 examples. When Bill Gates became well-known, one of the things that he did became well-known, it was that once a year he'd go away for a week or 2 weeks and just think. He'd take a bunch of books. He's talked about it on this show. There was a piece today in the New York Times about a businessman from India, in USA Today, who gets up every morning, spends an hour just thinking about stuff.
Yep.
You have, as I remember, this practice of, after every quarter,
that's right,
going away for 2 or 3 days.
That's exactly right.
Tell me about that. What happens, and when you sit there and think, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I try to isolate myself
from family, from children,
everything.
Right.
And it's just because with a little bit of isolation, I find I start to get more creative. I do spend a lot of time web surfing during that 2 to 3 days, and just sort of looking at what other, what hobbyists are doing, what hackers are doing, what are the things that are sort of on the cutting edge. And then I will usually write 2 or 3, 3-page narratively structured documents, just memos, basically. And sometimes they're just memos to myself. I never,
Right.
They never see the light of day because I wake up in the morning and they don't seem very...
No, but you know what, as Auden said, as I famously said on this show a lot, how do I know what I think until I see what I've written? Sometimes you have to put it down like that in order to focus your thinking.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So, for me, that's a very valuable time. And for me, doing it once a quarter is the right kind of metronome. It feels good to do it for 2 or 3 days, once a quarter, and just lock myself away. No distractions from the office, no phones ringing.
Well, have you come up with big ideas during this period? As you know, one of those 2-week periods was when Bill Gates decided that they had missed the internet and he had turned the boat around.
Well, I've certainly come up with principles, themes, big directions, even certain tactical inventions during those things. But the important thing, Charlie, is that I bring them back to the office. Yeah. And I socialize those things with the broader executive team. And what I find is, by the time that process is done, I'm never really sure if I invented anything or not. Because
it started here and ended up here.
It starts here and it ends up there. And that's what you want. If you have a bunch of smart people, it becomes, somebody says, well, that'll never work because you've forgotten about X, Y, or Z. And then you sort of step back and you recognize that's true, and it morphs and builds. And one of the things that we're doing right now, which is very successful, is called Fulfillment by Amazon, and it came out of one of these thinking retreats, but then it got improved significantly by a bunch of people.
What's Fulfillment by Amazon?
Fulfillment by Amazon is where we let our third-party sellers take their inventory. Normally, they ship the inventory to the customers. Right. We let them send us their inventory, and we stow it in our fulfillment centers. And then we do the fulfillment for them. So when you order a used book, we might be the ones that ship it to you. Now, they still own that inventory, but they're stowing it in our fulfillment center. And we've worked that out and have a program that's growing very rapidly. And the great thing about it is that it gives a better customer experience. Because now, if you order 2 things, they'll come in one box. If you order a used book and a new book, for example, but this works for electronics and other things too, they'll come in one box, which saves on transportation costs. It's a better experience for the customer. They get free Super Saver shipping when they do that. All these things. The Amazon Prime membership now works on third-party units. This is a service also great for the sellers, because the sellers, if you put yourself in the place of a small third-party seller, and a lot of them are, mom-and-pop shops that are selling these used products or sometimes new products, they can't take a vacation.
Right.
Because if they do, it's an unpaid vacation. There's nobody there to ship the product. So here they can focus on the sourcing side of business.
A long time ago, it seems like there was this great debate between online and bricks and mortar, and whether online e-commerce online would be the end and bricks and mortar would sort of disappear. Then you saw I think the next next role of that was all of a sudden bricks and mortar got smart. People like Walmart said, we can do online too. Mm-hmm. Where is that happening now? What's the sort of status of that notion?
I think what's happening is that, the internet is really kind of a horizontal enabling technology. This is one of the things that, this is why I know it's still early in the development of the internet, because people still talk about internet companies. And this is like, if you go back to, the early 20th century, people would have talked about electric companies, and they didn't mean electric utilities. They meant companies that use electricity. Yeah. But electricity is a horizontal enabling layer. It helped all companies. No matter what you did, if you were a manufacturer, you started building an electric power plant. I just toured a 300-year-old beer manufacturing facility in Europe, and sometime
for what purpose?
Well, I was there to visit. It's actually because they have one of these lean manufacturing facilities. And,
I see.
But there were some samples at the end.
Okay.
So, in 100 years ago or so, they installed electric power, and they had to generate their own electric power. But that didn't make them an electric company. They were still making beer. They were really a beer company. And what we see today is that the internet is still thought of as, kind of like a vertical. When, it's like these are the internet companies. And that's how you can tell it's early, because every company is benefiting from the internet.
What do you worry most about in terms of the growth of Amazon?
Well, for me, if you look at where I spend my time, which is a good proxy for the things I worry about, I'm always wanting to know, how do we know that we have the best customer experience? So I start, we know that the three things that are really important to customers are having the lowest prices, having vast selection so that they have choice, and getting the products to customers fast. That's why we did Amazon Prime, by the way, because it's a way of getting products to customers much, much faster, and it's been very successful. Customers love it. Now, it's what I want to know. So, for example, when a category leader tells me that in their category they have the lowest prices.
Categories of product line?
Yeah. Say digital cameras or
cameras,
so you have the lowest price. How do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know you have the lowest prices? And of course, we have tools and we have processes and we have reports that go in and we have ways to audit and inspect whether we really have the lowest prices. But those are, so I spend, and the reason I'm so obsessed over those big drivers of the customer experience is because I believe that the success we've had over the last 12 years has been driven exclusively by that customer experience. We're not great advertisers. What we do is we try to build an experience, start with the customer, figure out what they want, work backwards, figure out how to give it to them. Actually, this is like that. People have asked me, why did you build a hardware device? Well, 3 years ago, we decided we wanted a seamless integrated service. And the only way to do that was to build a hardware device. So we went out and started and hired a team of brilliant hardware engineers, and they started working on this device.
I have this great theory of life, which is questions are important.
That seems very appropriate for you.
But it was, even in whatever product line, you began to ask questions.
Yes.
And the question you might have asked about this is that, what is it about reading a book that is most important to a reader? As you say, the book disappears.
Exactly.
So that's an idea, but it began with a question.
That's
what is
exactly
the most
right.
And then you say, well, can we document? What would be great about developing an electronic book?
Right.
A digital book. It would be if you did not have to go through the downloading process.
Exactly.
It was all self-contained. You began to ask a series of questions and figure out how we get to whatever the answer to those questions is.
That is exactly, and that is our development process.
You are now about 50% in terms of international growth versus domestic
it's about
growth?
half and half. We have about half our business is outside the U.S. and about half is inside the U.S.
China is the biggest market by far?
China is growing.
In terms of growth?
In terms of growth, is growing very fast.
Now, how is it different in terms of...
Oh, it's totally different.
All right, tell me.
So our business in China, which is fantastic, growing fast, big investment area for us, is, there's not good transportation infrastructure. You can't just call UPS or DHL and the U.S. Postal Service.
Right. They just ordered these books. Would you please take them?
We employ a network of bicycle couriers directly in all the major urban areas.
Right.
So these bicycle couriers literally deliver the products. There's not good penetration of credit cards yet in China. By the way, all these things are changing rapidly. The transportation infrastructure, you can see that it's happening. You can almost watch it. It's happening so quickly.
It's happening in all emerging markets.
Yes.
The change and the absence of these things.
That's right. And so payment infrastructure, too. So we actually do mostly cash on delivery. The bicycle courier hands over the products, and the customer hands over the cash. We have to, so it's fascinating. It's really, it's very exciting to go and visit those facilities because you can sense the energy that's there.
Europe is changing too and growing?
Yes, Europe is growing. It's big already and growing.
Okay. Space. Where did this
Space is very big. It's vast.
It's huge, isn't it?
Huge.
You own 200,000 acres of land in Texas?
Yes.
What are you going to do with it?
Well, when you're building rockets and launching rockets, it's nice to have a bit of a buffer.
Yeah. What is that? Just landed in our yard. So tell me what your dream is.
Well, we're building a vertical takeoff, vertical landing spacecraft that will take 3 or more astronauts to the edge of space. It's a suborbital journey. So it's like what Alan Shepard did. And the program is called New Shepard, paying homage to Alan. And so it goes up, and you have a few minutes in zero gravity. You can look out, you can see the limb of the Earth and how thin the atmosphere is of the Earth, which people tell me who've been in space, tell me that's a transformative experience. And you get up there, And then this vehicle is going to come back down and it's going to land on its tail. It's reusable, which is very unusual for space vehicles. They're almost all expendable rockets.
Right.
And it's going to come and land on its tail. It's sort of like a Buck Rogers rocket. And so that's the...
And what's the stage of development today?
Well, we have flown our first development vehicle. We flew it several times. We're now working on our...
It went up and came back safely.
That's right. And it was this low-altitude demonstration vehicle. We're now working on our second development vehicle. There'll be at least one more development vehicle after that, and at least, I don't know, maybe there'll be more. You know, we're not in any hurry because we're trying to build a very safe, well-engineered vehicle. We don't see any reason to rush on this, so
And
we'll do
where
it.
does the revenue come from?
Our motto is gradatum ferociter. It stands for step by step ferociously. And
So-
we're just going to do it one step at a time.
And what's the market for this?
Well, this is basically a kind of a tourism market
Yes, I
where
know, but I mean,
people would, pay to go up into suborbital space. I don't know how big the market is. I mean, people have done studies that have tried to size this market, but I'm highly skeptical of such studies because you don't really know until you do it. You know, well-intentioned people, when they respond to the survey, will say, "Oh yeah, I would do that," but they don't really know whether they
But
would
are
do
you
it.
more interested in space, or are you more interested in a business?
Oh, well, my passion is for space, for sure. But I do think that this can be made into a viable business. I think you have to be very long-term oriented. Yeah. People who complained that we invested in Amazon for 7 years would be horrified by Blue Origin.
If they saw the business model. right.
They would.
Blue Origin is the name
Blue
of the
Origin is the name
venture.
of the
Okay.
company.
Did you ever talk to Charles Simonyi about what he...
Yes, in fact, he came and spoke at Blue Origin and spoke to our employees.
What did he
after
say about his experience?
I called him while he was up there and talked to him on the phone while he
And
was
he
in
could
the,
see the tilt
while
of
he
the
was
air
in
and
the
all that.
space shuttle, space station.
He loved it.
He loved being in the
And
International
why
Space
would you
Station.
do that?
Well, I want to go on a Blue Origin vehicle, and that's what we're working on. I like to build. I'm into the building the vehicle. I will go. I definitely will go. I can't wait, actually.
Congratulations on this. I mean, it's an important thing, and because it's change. Books aren't dead. Newsweek's cover. Here is the device. It's called a Kindle. There are. How many books are in here right now? You said, or it can hold.
Well, it'll hold 200 books. It only weighs 10 ounces, and you can buy 90,000 different books, plus newspapers, blogs,
and all the other things
magazines.
we talked about. It's a fascinating one more development in the history of Amazon, as also the history of technology. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Charlie.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you, too.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.